One of the most powerful things about stories is their ability to be created, revised, retold, forgotten, and revived. Stories cross the boundaries of time and place, allowing them to offer perspectives that are both timely and timeless. Stories let us see through others' eyes and learn from their experience. While many stories can be found in books, the most important stories are those through our lived experiences. The power of your story. So we want to start by sharing our story with you. It was the end of August and my very first day of kindergarten. I remember the day vividly, standing in the lobby of a Catholic school, waiting to be admitted into what seemed like a very spacious kindergarten classroom. I was consumed with excitement. My older sister had already attended the same school for 2 years, so there was a familiar feeling to the building. As I continued to wait to enter the classroom, I found myself face to face with another 5-year-old girl. I had never met her, but her next 7 words I would never forget. While my memory still cannot recollect everything that happened that day, these 7 words will never be forgotten. She said, "I have a dad, and you don't." Now, I was not confused by what she had said because just 3 weeks prior, a police officer had shown up at our house. He reported to my mother that my father had been found in a forest preserve and was dead. He had committed suicide, something no one ever talked about. My mom was incredibly courageous and told my sister and I, reassuring us we would be okay. What I didn't know was that when I showed up for my first day of kindergarten, expecting to blend in like every other student, looking forward to the playhouse with a slide that was built in, my father's tragic death was becoming my story. I was labeled as the fatherless kid, the one without a dad. I was told repeatedly not to talk about how my father died by my teachers because it could make the other kids uncomfortable. So I stopped talking about it as if it never happened. What this demonstrates, I think, is how impressionable and vulnerable we are in the face of a story, especially as children. As a kindergartner then who began to read, it was nearly impossible to find a book with a family that did not have a dad. I could not identify with the kids in the book, which often depicted a father, a mother, 2 kids, and a dog. That is the danger of the single story. My family looked very different, and so my story was also very different. While that 5-year-old girl's words are still imprinted in my memory, what strikes me now is that she felt sorry for me before she ever really met me. She had a default position towards me as a child without a father. She had never known anyone without a father. She had a single story. That story was one of catastrophe. Stories matter, and we have many stories and cannot be defined by the single story. Stories can repair, and stories can be used to empower and humanize. When we reject the single story, regain imagination.
Growing up in the Midwest city of Kalamazoo, Michigan, I was a kid who absolutely loved school. I was the shy oldest child in a family of 3 daughters. A lot of things in the world scared me, but I found school reassuring. I loved the structure and all the rules. I felt safe and secure with my teachers who were white, female, and looked and sounded a lot like the adults in my life. I learned very quickly that I wasn't the smartest kid in the class, but that if I worked really hard and followed all the rules and duplicated the example at the top of the page and met all the deadlines, that I would be successful. This was even true for me in sports. I was not an athlete and usually dreaded PE, praying the ball would never come near me. But I soon figured out that I was a good runner. I quickly learned the more I trained, the better I got. There was no chance involved. So I followed all the rules and worked harder than I needed to, and went through college with the plan to get a job that was practical, reasonable, and would allow me to be financially solvent. But when I finally landed a job in advertising in Chicago, I looked around and realized that I didn't care one bit about what I was spending my entire day doing. Also, I noticed that all the guys that I went to school with who didn't follow all the rules and weren't the best students and didn't work the hardest were all making a lot more money than I was. I started to question everything about what I'd been taught, how I'd been taught it, and what I really wanted to do with my life. Finding my way to education came from quitting my advertising job and buying a one-way ticket to Spain. I traveled until I found a town I loved and jobs teaching English that paid the bills, discovered that I loved working with young children and also the art and science of teaching. When my husband and I moved from Chicago to Evanston with a new baby boy in tow, we noticed that there was a lot of open-air drug dealing going on in the street in front of us. When I called my alderman to see what we could do about this, she convinced me to start a block club and come to a ward meeting. At one of the ward meetings, I met a social worker from the Evanston Police Department who was there to lead us in a circle about the hopes and fears for the youth of our city. I internally rolled my eyes and thought, if this is a little weird and kumbaya-ish for all these old grouchy neighbors of mine are going to think it's weird. But by the end of the circle, I was never happier to be wrong, and I started to believe in the power of restorative practices and listening to people's stories. I also believe that we can use the power of stories to teach and listen to important life lessons in school and about what it really means to be human, not just what it means to be compliant and follow the rules.